3 days later, Jake walked into the same classroom ready for another lesson about his supposedly extinct species. Professor Zethkar had promised to discuss human technology and achievements which Jake knew would be entertaining in all the wrong ways. The professor had spent years studying human records but had managed to misunderstand almost everything about how human civilization actually worked. This was perfect for keeping the secret, that humans were still alive and thriving in hidden colonies throughout the galaxy. Professor Zethkar activated the holographic displays and images of human technology filled the air above the students. There were computers and communication devices, transportation systems and manufacturing equipment, medical tools and scientific instruments. To Jake, these looked like normal examples of human innovation, but he could already tell from the professor's expression that everything was about to be explained incorrectly. Students observed these remarkable fabrications that humans created in their desperate final years. Professor Zethkar announced as he gestured toward the floating images with his forearms. When facing extinction, humans apparently began creating elaborate fantasy stories about their own capabilities. These technological claims represent some of the most creative fiction ever discovered in galactic archaeological records. Jake had to bite his tongue to keep from correcting the professor immediately. Every piece of technology shown in the hologram was real and had actually been used by humans for decades or centuries. But the alien professor had decided that human achievements were impossible, so he interpreted all the evidence as lies and fantasy stories. The first image showed early human computers from the late 20th century. Professor Zethkar pointed at the machines with obvious amusement in his voice. Humans claimed these devices could perform millions of calculations per second using only electrical current. As we all know, such processing power would require biological neural networks or crystal matrix systems. The idea that simple electrical circuits could achieve complex computation is clearly impossible with any known physics. A student from the insect-like Jex species raised one of her 6 arms to ask a question. "Professor, what about their claims of global communication networks? The records suggest they connected every individual on their planet using these computer devices." Her voice made buzzing sounds between words, which was normal for her species when speaking galactic common language. Professor Zethkar made his clicking laugh sound again. Ah yes, the famous internet mythology. Humans claimed they created a planet-wide network that allowed instant communication between any 2 points on their world. They even suggested that individuals could access all human knowledge through these networks. Obviously, this is another desperate fantasy, since such technology would require computational resources beyond what any single planet could possibly generate. Jake wrote down every word while thinking about how he had been using quantum encrypted internet connections to communicate with human colonies across multiple star systems. The technology that Professor Zethkar considered impossible was actually primitive compared to what humans had developed during their centuries of secret expansion throughout the galaxy. The next series of images showed human transportation systems, including cars, trains, ships, and aircraft. Professor Zethkar studied these pictures with the expression his species made when they found something particularly amusing. Notice how humans claimed their individual transport vehicles could achieve speeds of over 100 kilometers per hour. This would require energy expenditure that exceeds the practical limits of chemical fuel systems. No rational species would waste so much energy on individual transportation when group movement systems are obviously more efficient. Jake thought about the starships currently hidden throughout the galaxy that could travel between solar systems in weeks rather than the months or years that alien vessels required. Human transportation technology had advanced far beyond anything the galactic species possessed, but they had no way of knowing this since they believed humans no longer existed. The lesson continued with Professor Zethkar showing images of human space exploration programs. The pictures included rockets launching from Earth, satellites in orbit, space stations, and even claims about humans landing on their planet's moon. The professor's mandibles clicked rapidly as he prepared to explain why all of this was obviously fictional. Here we see perhaps the most ridiculous claims in all human mythology, Professor Zethkar said while gesturing at images of rockets and spacecraft. Humans apparently believed they could achieve orbital velocity using primitive chemical propulsion systems. The fuel requirements alone would make such missions completely impractical, even if such flights were possible the radiation exposure in space would kill any biological being within hours. Several students made sounds of agreement as they nodded or made whatever gestures their species used to show understanding. A young Vorthon named Singing Stone raised her tentacle arm to contribute to the discussion. Professor, the energy calculations seem especially unrealistic. Chemical rockets would need to carry more fuel than payload, which makes no logical sense for any space mission. Jake almost started laughing as he listened to aliens explaining why space travel was impossible while sitting in a classroom on a space station orbiting a planet hundreds of light years from Earth. The irony was so perfect that he had trouble maintaining his serious student expression. These species had achieved interstellar flight through completely different technological paths and could not imagine how humans might have developed alternative solutions. Professor Zethkar moved on to discuss human claims about scientific achievements. The holographic display showed images of laboratories, research facilities, medical equipment, and scientific instruments. Everything looked perfectly normal to Jake, but he knew the professor was about to explain why human science was all pretend. Human scientific records contain some truly creative fiction about their research capabilities. Professor Zethkar explained while pointing at various laboratory images. They claimed to have developed something called genetic medicine that could modify biological organisms at the cellular level. They also suggested they had created artificial materials stronger than anything found in nature. Most amusing of all, they believed they had discovered fundamental forces that could be manipulated to create new forms of energy. Jake knew that humans had actually mastered genetic engineering, material science, and energy manipulation centuries ago. The hidden human colonies used all of these technologies routinely in their daily lives. But Professor Zethkar had decided human science was fictional, so he dismissed every real achievement as impossible. Fantasy. The class period was almost over when Professor Zethkar reached his final conclusion about human technology claims. Students, what we see here is the tragic pattern of a dying species, creating elaborate myths about their own greatness. When humans realized they could not survive, they began inventing stories about incredible achievements to make themselves feel important. This psychological response to extinction has been observed in several other species throughout galactic history. As students packed their materials and prepared to leave, Jake heard them discussing the lesson among themselves. Most seemed to agree with the professor that humans had been delusional about their own capabilities. A few expressed sympathy for a species that felt the need to create such elaborate fantasy stories before dying out completely. Jake walked out of the classroom with a much better understanding of how the galactic species viewed human potential. They literally could not imagine that humans might have developed different solutions to technological problems. Their own evolutionary history had led them down specific paths of development, and they assumed all intelligent species must follow similar patterns. That night, Jake sent another encrypted report to the Colonial Defense Network with detailed information about alien technological assumptions and limitations. The intelligence would be valuable when humans finally revealed themselves to the galaxy. Every species was preparing for contact, based on completely wrong ideas about what humans could actually accomplish. The next phase of the secret human plan was already beginning in star systems throughout the galaxy, but none of the aliens suspected anything unusual was happening. They were too busy studying the mythology of an extinct species to notice that the same species was quietly building the most advanced civilization the galaxy had ever seen. The semester was nearly over when Professor Zethkar made an announcement that changed everything for Jake's secret mission. The final project for the xenobiology class would require each student to present original research on extinct species, with extra credit awarded for discoveries that challenged conventional academic wisdom. Jake saw this as the perfect opportunity to begin preparing the galactic community for what was about to happen when humans revealed themselves to the universe. Jake spent the next 2 weeks carefully crafting a presentation that would introduce doubt about human extinction without revealing his true identity or the existence of the hidden colonies. He needed to plant seeds of possibility in the minds of his classmates and professor while maintaining his cover as just another alien student from a distant world. The timing was critical because human forces throughout the galaxy were almost ready to begin their coordinated emergence from centuries of secret preparation. On the day of presentations, Jake sat nervously in his usual back row seat, watching other students deliver their research findings. A Corvin student presented evidence that the rock-eating granite devourers might have survived on asteroid mining platforms. A Zhek student argued that the crystalline harmony singers could still exist in the deep caves of gas giant moons. Each presentation followed the same pattern of suggesting that supposedly extinct species might have found ways to survive in environments that had never been properly searched. When Professor Zethkar called Jake's name, he walked to the front of the classroom with his heart beating faster than normal. Everything he had learned during months of attending classes was about to be put to use in the most important presentation of his life. The success of humanity's return to galactic civilization might depend on how well he could prepare these aliens for the truth they were about to discover. Esteemed colleagues, I have chosen to research recent evidence suggesting that humans from Earth might not be completely extinct, as we have always assumed. Jake began while activating his holographic display. My investigation has uncovered several inconsistencies in our understanding of human extinction that deserve serious academic consideration. The classroom became completely silent as students and professor focused their attention on Jake's presentation. Professor Zethkar's mandibles clicked nervously as he prepared to evaluate research that challenged his own expert conclusions about human extinction. Jake could see surprise and curiosity in the faces of his alien classmates as they prepared to consider new possibilities about the species they had been studying all semester. Jake's first piece of evidence was carefully selected: radio signal data that human colonies had been broadcasting toward Earth's solar system using outdated technology that would match alien expectations of human capabilities. Deep space monitoring stations have detected artificial radio transmissions from the Sol system, continuing for decades after the supposed extinction event. The signals use primitive amplitude modulation techniques consistent with human technology from their final historical period. Several students made sounds of surprise and confusion as they processed this information. A Vorthan student named Flowing Water raised her tentacle arm to ask a question. Jake, these signals could be automated systems continuing to broadcast without any living operators. Many extinct species left behind equipment that functioned for years after their civilizations ended. Jake nodded to acknowledge her point while preparing his response. An excellent observation, Flowing Water, but analysis of the signal patterns shows variations and modifications that suggest active operation rather than simple automated repetition. The transmissions include responses to solar weather, events and adjustments for equipment degradation that would require conscious oversight from intelligent operators. Professor Zethkar's forearms moved restlessly as he listened to Jake's analysis. These signals you mentioned have been detected before, but they were classified as natural phenomena or equipment malfunctions. The scientific consensus is that no life signs exist anywhere in the Sol system after multiple survey expeditions confirmed complete biological extinction. Jake had prepared for this exact objection, and his response was ready immediately. With respect, Professor, those survey missions only examined planetary surfaces and obvious orbital positions. Human technological development patterns suggest they had begun constructing deep space habitats and asteroid mining operations before the supposed extinction event. They might have survived in locations that conventional surveys would never think to investigate. The holographic display changed to show Jake's second piece of evidence, which was carefully analyzed: progression charts of human technological advancement. The data showed how rapidly human capabilities had been developing in their final centuries and projected where their technology might have reached if they had continued developing without interruption. Mathematical analysis of human innovation rates indicates they were advancing much faster than previously calculated. Jake continued while pointing at the progression charts. Their technological development was accelerating exponentially rather than following the linear progression patterns typical of most galactic species. If humans survived their supposed extinction event, they might have achieved capabilities far beyond what we assume possible for their species. A Corvin student named Bouldermind made the grinding sound his species used to indicate deep thought. Jake, your mathematical projections seem to suggest humans could have developed interstellar travel capabilities within a few centuries of their supposed extinction. This would require technological advancement rates unprecedented among any known species. Jake smiled as he delivered his most carefully prepared argument. Bolder mind, that assumption is based on comparing human development to other species that evolved from collective consciousness backgrounds. Humans developed individual initiative and competitive innovation systems that might produce much faster technological advancement than species that prioritize group cooperation and consensus decision-making. The classroom erupted in discussion as students debated the implications of Jake's research among themselves. Professor Zethkar's expression showed the kind of confusion his species displayed when confronting ideas that challenged fundamental assumptions about reality. Jake could see that his presentation was having exactly the effect he had hoped for by introducing doubt about human extinction without making claims dramatic enough to seem impossible. Jake's final piece of evidence was the most subtle and dangerous part of his presentation. He displayed analysis of resource extraction patterns in star systems near Earth that showed signatures consistent with advanced mining and construction activities. The data was real because human colonies had been conducting exactly these operations for decades, but Jake presented it as mysterious phenomena that might indicate human survival. Long-range sensor data from multiple star systems shows evidence of large-scale resource extraction and construction activities using techniques that match theoretical projections of advanced human industrial capabilities, Jake explained while highlighting the relevant data patterns. The operations appear to be conducted by mobile platforms that avoid detection by staying in deep space between star systems. Professor Zethkar studied the resource extraction data with obvious concern as he began to realize the implications of what Jake was presenting. If these patterns represent actual intelligent activity rather than natural phenomena, then some unknown species has been conducting major operations throughout this region of the galaxy without making contact with any established civilizations. Jake nodded gravely as he delivered his conclusion. Professor, my research suggests we may need to reconsider our assumptions about human extinction. The evidence indicates that humans might have survived in ways we never expected and developed capabilities beyond what we thought possible for their species. If humans still exist, they have remained hidden for centuries while building something we do not yet understand. The presentation ended with the classroom in complete silence as everyone processed the implications of Jake's research. Professor Zethkar's mandibles clicked rapidly as he tried to evaluate evidence that challenged everything he had taught about human extinction. Students whispered among themselves in their native languages while trying to decide what they believed about these new possibilities. When the class period ended, Jake packed his materials knowing that he had successfully planted the seeds of doubt that would help prepare the galactic community for humanity's return. Professor Zethkar approached him with obvious concern about the implications of his research findings. Jake, your presentation raises troubling questions that require further investigation, the professor said while his forearms moved nervously. If humans survived their supposed extinction and have been hiding throughout the galaxy for centuries, then we may need to completely reconsider our understanding of this species and their capabilities. Jake nodded seriously while maintaining his role as a concerned student researcher. Professor, I believe my findings deserve consideration by the broader academic community. The third week of classes arrived with Jake feeling more confident about his secret mission at Galactic University. Professor Zethkar had announced they would study human military history, and Jake was particularly curious about how aliens interpreted human warfare. He suspected the professor would misunderstand human combat tactics just as badly as he had misunderstood human technology, and this information would be extremely valuable for the hidden human colonies preparing their return to galactic civilization. Professor Zethkar entered the classroom, carrying what appeared to be ancient human military equipment that had been recovered from archaeological sites. There were helmets and uniforms, weapons and communication devices, maps and tactical manuals. Everything looked authentic to Jake, who recognized most of the items from history lessons he had received during his childhood in the colonies. But he knew Professor Zethkar was about to explain why none of it made any sense. The holographic display activated to show images of human soldiers in various historical periods. There were ancient warriors with swords and shields, medieval knights in metal armor, modern soldiers with firearms and equipment, and futuristic troops with advanced weapon systems. To Jake, this represented the natural evolution of human military technology over thousands of years of development. To Professor Zethkar, it was apparently evidence of complete military incompetence. Students, today we examine the most ridiculous aspect of human civilization, which was their approach to organized conflict. Professor Zethkar announced while his forearms gestured at the military images. Human warfare represents perhaps the best example of why this species inevitably destroyed itself through poor decision-making and impossible tactical concepts. Jake, prepared to take notes on what he expected would be a completely wrong analysis of human military capabilities. The information would help human military planners understand exactly how alien species thought about warfare and what mistakes they would make when humans finally revealed themselves to the galaxy. Professor Zethkar pointed at an image showing human soldiers in combat formation. Observe these individuals who appear to be operating without direct neural connection to a central command authority. Humans apparently believed that individual soldiers could make tactical decisions during battle without constant guidance from their leadership hierarchy. The chaos that would result from such undisciplined behavior makes effective military action completely impossible. A student from the hive-minded Zephyrian species made a sound that indicated confusion and concern. Professor, how could any military force function without proper coordination between all units? Individual decision-making during combat would lead to total breakdown of any strategic plan within minutes of engagement. Beginning. Jake almost smiled as he realized the fundamental problem with alien understanding of human tactics. Every species in the galaxy had evolved from collective consciousness backgrounds where individuals naturally worked together as parts of larger group minds. The concept of independent thinking and individual initiative was so foreign to them that they literally could not comprehend how it might be an advantage in warfare. Professor Zethkar continued his lecture while displaying images of human military technology. Notice the primitive individual weapons that humans claim to use in battle. Each soldier carried personal firearms rather than being connected to centralized weapon systems. This approach would waste enormous amounts of resources, since every individual would need separate ammunition supplies, maintenance equipment, and training programs. The professor moved to the next set of images showing human military vehicles and aircraft. Human records suggest they built thousands of different vehicle types for military use. A rational species would obviously develop one optimal design and manufacture it in large quantities, but humans apparently created different vehicles for different purposes, which indicates they had no understanding of efficient resource management or standardized logistics systems. Jake wrote down every criticism while thinking about how wrong the professor's analysis actually was. Human military diversity and individual initiative were major advantages that had allowed human forces to adapt quickly to changing situations and overcome enemies who relied on predictable group tactics. But alien species could not imagine fighting any way other than how their own evolution had programmed them to think. The lesson moved on to discuss human military organization and command structures. Professor Zethkar displayed organizational charts that showed human military hierarchies from various historical periods. The charts looked perfectly logical to Jake, but the professor was clearly about to explain why they were completely dysfunctional. Human military records show command structures that allowed lower-ranking individuals to override orders from higher authorities in certain situations. Professor Zethkar said while pointing at the organizational charts. They called this concept field discretion or tactical autonomy, which meant individual soldiers could ignore direct commands if they believed local conditions required different actions. No functional military organization could possibly operate under such chaotic conditions. A student from the crystalline Felthari species created harmonic vibrations that indicated she wanted to ask a question. Professor, what about their casualty reports from major conflicts? Human records suggest they fought wars lasting multiple years with casualties numbering only in the millions. Surely any species primitive enough to fight without proper coordination would destroy itself completely within the first few days of combat. Professor Zethkar made his clicking laugh sound that Jake was beginning to find annoying. Excellent observation, harmony of thought. This is exactly how we know that human military records are largely fictional. Any species that attempted to fight wars using individual initiative and decentralized command authority would suffer catastrophic losses almost immediately. The fact that humans claim to survive extended conflicts proves their military histories are fantasy stories rather than factual accounts. Jake had to work hard to keep his expression neutral while listening to Professor Zethkar dismiss some of the most successful military campaigns in galactic history as impossible fiction. Human forces had repeatedly achieved victory against superior numbers through tactical flexibility, individual creativity, and adaptive leadership. But aliens who thought in terms of hive minds and collective decision-making could not understand how such tactics might actually work. The professor continued showing examples of human military equipment and explaining why each item was impractical or impossible. He dismissed human body armor as too heavy for individual soldiers to wear effectively. He claimed human communication systems were too complex for battlefield use. He argued that human weapons were too diverse and specialized when simple standardized designs would be more efficient. Every criticism revealed another fundamental difference between human and alien thinking patterns. Humans valued adaptability and individual capability, while aliens prioritized efficiency and group coordination. Neither approach was inherently better, but the aliens had convinced themselves that their way was the only logical method for any intelligent species to develop. Near the end of the class period, Professor Zethkar reached his final conclusion about human military capabilities. Students, what we observe in human military records is the same pattern we have seen in their technology and social organization. A dying species created elaborate fantasy stories about their own greatness to avoid facing the reality of their limitations. No military force could function using the chaotic methods that humans claim to employ. As students prepared to leave, Jake heard them discussing the lesson with the same mixture of amusement and pity they had shown toward other aspects of human civilization. None of them suspected that human military forces were currently positioned throughout the galaxy using exactly the tactics that Professor Zethkar had just declared impossible. Jake walked out of the classroom knowing that human military planners would be very interested in his report. The galactic species were preparing their own military forces based on completely wrong assumptions about how humans would fight. When the time came for humans to reveal themselves, the aliens would be facing tactical approaches they could not predict or understand. That evening, Jake sent his most detailed intelligence report yet to the Colonial Defense Network. The information included everything he had learned about alien military thinking, their technological assumptions, and their psychological blind spots regarding individual initiative and creative problem-solving. Human forces would have enormous advantages when they finally emerged from hiding because their enemies literally could not imagine how human tactics might work. The secret human colonies were almost ready to begin the next phase of their plan, but Jake's mission at Galactic University was providing intelligence that would make their eventual success much more certain. Every day brought new insights into alien weaknesses and misconceptions that humans could exploit when the time came to reclaim their place among the stars. The morning light of 3 suns filtered through the crystal dome of Galactic University as Professor Zethkar walked into his classroom with his usual confident stride. His 4 arms carried data tablets while his long neck swayed from side to side as he greeted his students. The classroom held 25 young beings from different worlds across the galaxy, and today was going to be special. Professor Zethkar had spent the last few months preparing this lesson about extinct species, and he was particularly excited about one case that would amaze his students. Jake Martinez sat in the back row trying to look casual as he adjusted his fake identity documents on his desk. To everyone in the room, he was just another student from a distant colony world. His human appearance was explained as genetic changes that happened over many generations of living on different planets. Nobody suspected that he was actually from the species they were about to study. His pale skin and normal human features were perfectly hidden in plain sight among all the strange-looking aliens around him. The professor activated the holographic display in the center of the room, and images of various creatures began floating in the air. There were giant flying beasts from gas planets, tiny crystal beings that lived in asteroid fields, and underwater monsters from ocean worlds. Each image showed a species that no longer existed anywhere in the galaxy. The students watched with interest as Professor Zethkar began his lecture about life and death among the stars. Today we will study the most interesting case of extinction in galactic history, Professor Zethkar announced as his mandibles clicked with excitement. The species known as humans from the planet they called Earth. The hologram changed to show a blue and green world with white clouds swirling around it. Jake felt a strange emotion seeing his home planet displayed. Like this, but he kept his face neutral and continued. Taking notes like any other student, the professor continued his lecture while moving around the room with his long legs. Humans were perhaps the most unusual species we have ever discovered. They managed to destroy themselves in ways that most species would never even consider. What makes them particularly fascinating is how they seem to actively choose the most dangerous path in every situation they faced. Several students made sounds of surprise and confusion as they tried to understand this concept. A young Vorthon student named Crystal Song raised her tentacle-like arm to ask a question. Professor, why would any species deliberately choose dangerous options? Does this not go against basic survival instincts that all intelligent life possesses? Her voice had the musical quality that all Vorthons shared when they spoke in the common galactic language. Professor Zethkar made the clicking sound that indicated amusement in his species. Excellent question, Crystal Song. This is exactly what makes humans so unique among all the species we have studied. They appeared to have what they called courage or bravery, which meant they would face danger even when safer options were available. This behavior pattern appears throughout their entire historical record. Jake almost laughed out loud but managed to control himself. The professor was completely wrong about human motivations, but his misunderstanding was actually helping the secret human colonies stay hidden. If the aliens thought humans were just crazy danger seekers, then they would never suspect the real truth about human survival and planning abilities. The holographic display changed again to show images of human cities and technology. Professor Zethkar pointed at the pictures with two of his forearms while the other two held his teaching materials. Look at these structures they built. Humans created what they called skyscrapers, which were buildings that reached incredible heights. Any sensible species would build underground for safety, but humans built upward toward the sky where storms and flying creatures could destroy their homes. A student from the Rocky Corvin species made a grinding sound that meant confusion. Professor, the energy requirements to build such structures would be enormous. Why waste resources on height when depth provides much better protection from environmental hazards? His voice sounded like stones rubbing together when he spoke the common language. Another excellent observation, Professor Zethkar replied. Humans seem to value what they called beauty and achievement over practical concerns like safety and efficiency. Their entire civilization was built around taking unnecessary risks for emotional satisfaction rather than logical survival strategies. Jake wrote down everything the professor said while thinking about how wrong these conclusions were. Humans built upward because it was actually more efficient use of land and resources. They took calculated risks because the benefits often outweighed the dangers. But the alien professor had no way to understand human thinking patterns because his species had evolved from group mind, creatures that made decisions very differently. The lesson continued for another hour as Professor Zethkar showed more examples of human behavior that he considered proof of their self-destructive nature. He talked about human sports where people competed against each other in physical contests. He showed pictures of human vehicles that could move at high speeds. He displayed images of human space programs where they built rockets to leave their planet. Every example that Professor Zethkar used to prove humans were crazy actually showed how creative and ambitious they were, but the professor and all his students interpreted everything through the lens of their own species' experiences. They could not imagine wanting to compete individually rather than work as a group. They could not understand why anyone would want to travel fast when slow and steady was safer. They could not comprehend the desire to explore space when planets provided everything needed for survival. As the class period ended, Professor Zethkar gave the students their assignment for next week. I want each of you to research one aspect of human civilization and prepare a short presentation about how their behavior patterns led to their extinction. Remember that humans represent the perfect example of how intelligent species can destroy themselves through poor decision-making. Jake packed his materials and walked out of the classroom with the other students. Several of them were already discussing their assignment topics and sharing ideas about human stupidity. None of them noticed the small smile on Jake's face as he listened to their conversations. If they only knew that humans were not only still alive, but were actually preparing for something much bigger, than anyone in the galaxy suspected. That evening, Jake sent an encrypted message to his contacts in the hidden human colonies. The report contained everything he had learned about how aliens viewed human extinction and what they believed about human capabilities. This information would be valuable for planning the next phase of humanity's secret return to galactic civilization. The aliens thought humans were dead and gone forever, but they were about to discover just how wrong they could be. 3 days after Jake's presentation, everything changed in ways that no one in the galaxy could have predicted. Jake was walking to his morning classes when emergency alarms began sounding throughout Galactic University, and every communication device in the facility activated simultaneously with urgent news broadcasts. Students and faculty gathered around holographic displays as reporters from across the galaxy delivered the most shocking news in centuries of galactic civilization. Ships were appearing everywhere throughout known space in perfectly coordinated timing that demonstrated planning and preparation beyond anything the galactic species had ever witnessed. Hundreds of vessels that had been completely invisible to all sensor systems were suddenly decloaking at major trade routes, strategic resource locations, and important communication hubs from the core worlds to the furthest frontier settlements. Every ship bore markings and symbols that xenobiologists recognized from their studies but had never expected to see in reality. Jake stood with his classmates, watching the news feeds while trying to maintain his expression of surprise and confusion like everyone else around him. Inside his mind, he felt tremendous excitement and pride as the moment he had been preparing for throughout his entire mission finally arrived. Humanity was announcing its return to the galaxy in the most dramatic and effective way possible after centuries of careful planning and secret preparation. Professor Zethkar arrived at the university in a state of obvious panic as his forearms moved frantically while he tried to process multiple news feeds simultaneously. His species displayed stress through rapid color changes in their skin, and Jake could see that the professor was cycling through the entire spectrum as he struggled to understand what was happening throughout the galaxy. The first official communication from the human fleets came through the Galactic Emergency Broadcasting Network exactly 1 hour after the initial ship appearances. A calm human voice speaking perfect galactic common language introduced himself as Admiral Steve Parker, representing the United Human Colonial Federation and requesting immediate, peaceful contact with the Galactic Council for the purpose of establishing formal diplomatic relations. Jake watched Professor Zethkar's face as the professor realized that his entire academic career had been built around studying a species that was not only still alive, but had apparently been preparing for this moment for centuries. The professor's mandibles clicked rapidly as he tried to process information that challenged every assumption he had made about human extinction and capabilities. Students throughout the university were gathering in groups to discuss the implications of these revelations. Jake heard conversations in dozens of different languages as young beings from across the galaxy tried to understand how their fundamental assumptions about reality had been so completely wrong. Many were expressing admiration for human planning abilities, while others were concerned about what humans might want now that they had revealed themselves. The news broadcasts continued throughout the day with reports of human ships making peaceful contact at every major population center in the galaxy. Human ambassadors were requesting meetings with local governments and offering to share information about their survival and development during the centuries when everyone believed they were extinct. Every contact was conducted with perfect diplomatic protocol that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of galactic political systems. Jake's communication device buzzed with an encrypted message from his Colonial Defense Network contacts, indicating that his cover mission was complete, and he could now reveal his true identity when appropriate. The message included authorization codes that would verify his status as an official human representative, and instructions for transitioning from intelligence gathering to diplomatic contact duties. Professor Zethkar called an emergency class session that afternoon to discuss the implications of human survival for the field of xenobiology. Jake arrived at the classroom knowing that this would be the last time he attended as a secret student, rather than an open human representative. The moment he had been preparing for throughout months of careful deception was finally at hand. The professor stood before his students with an expression that showed complete confusion and intellectual crisis as he tried to reconcile everything he had taught about human extinction with the reality of human ships appearing throughout the galaxy. His forearms moved restlessly as he prepared to address questions that he had no answers for because his entire understanding of humans had been fundamentally wrong. Students, I must confess that recent events have proven my research about human extinction to be completely incorrect. Professor Zethkar began while his voice carried tones of professional embarrassment. Humans are obviously not extinct, and their capabilities appear to exceed everything we assumed possible for their species' development level. I owe all of you an apology for teaching information that has proven to be so inaccurate. Jake stood up from his seat in the back row and walked toward the front of the classroom, while every eye in the room followed his movement. He could see surprise and confusion on the faces of his classmates as they wondered why he was interrupting the professor's admission of error. The moment had arrived for him to reveal the truth about his identity and mission. Professor Zethkar, I believe I can help answer some of the questions you and the other students have about human survival and capabilities, Jake said as he reached the front of the classroom. My name is Jake Martinez, and I am very much not extinct. I have been attending your classes as an official representative of the United Human Colonial Federation gathering intelligence about galactic perceptions of humanity. The classroom became completely silent as students and professor processed this revelation. Professor Zethkar's mandibles stopped clicking as he stared at Jake with an expression of total shock. Several students made sounds of surprise in their native languages, while others simply stared with whatever facial expressions their species used to indicate complete amazement. Jake activated his personal communication device and displayed his official credentials as a Colonial Defense Network intelligence operative and diplomatic attaché. The holographic identification codes verified his authority to speak on behalf of humanity and his role in preparing for first contact with galactic civilization. Every piece of documentation was authentic and used encryption systems that were more advanced than anything the galactic species possessed. For the past 4 months, I have been reporting your lectures and class discussions to human, military, and diplomatic leadership, Jake continued while maintaining a respectful tone toward his professor. Your analysis of human extinction and capabilities has been extremely valuable in helping us understand galactic perceptions and prepare our approach for peaceful reintegration into interstellar civilization. Professor Zethkar's color changes accelerated as he realized that he had been teaching a human about why humans were extinct for an entire semester. The irony was so perfect that several students began making sounds that indicated amusement despite their confusion about the larger situation. The professor's academic reputation would never recover from having his theories about extinction disproven by a living member of the supposedly extinct species sitting in his classroom. Jake spent the next hour answering questions from his classmates about human survival, technological development, and future intentions regarding galactic civilization. He explained how human colonies had been established throughout the galaxy using advanced stealth technology and careful planning to avoid detection. He described human achievements in space travel, resource extraction, manufacturing, and military capabilities that exceeded galactic standards in multiple areas. The most important revelation was that humans had spent centuries studying galactic species and preparing for eventual contact based on detailed intelligence about alien psychology, technology, and political systems. Every human colony had been positioned and equipped to contribute to a coordinated emergence that would establish humanity as a major galactic power immediately rather than requiring years of gradual integration. As the discussion continued, Jake's classmates began to understand that humanity represented something completely new in galactic civilization, a species that had achieved advanced capabilities through individual initiative and competitive development, rather than collective consciousness and consensus decision-making. Human approaches to technology, military organization, and social structure were different from anything existing galactic species had developed. When the class session ended, Professor Zethkar approached Jake with a request that surprised everyone in the room. Jake, I would be honored if you would consider serving as a guest lecturer for my future classes about human civilization. It appears I have much to learn about your species and your unique approaches to survival and development. Jake smiled and accepted the professor's invitation, knowing that his new role would help prepare the next generation of galactics, citizens for the age of human expansion that was beginning. Humanity had successfully returned to galactic civilization, and the universe would never be the same again.